biggest thing is that I wanted to really talk about this because there's a lot of conversation going on about what's going on with marijuana. Like Congress passed legislation legalizing marijuana. No, not quite. That's not quite what happened. Um, and I want to really make it clear because I think, the hype gets in the way and it ends up going really, really left, or it can go really, really left. And I don't want anybody getting jammed up, but I also want people to understand the opportunity too. So it's a balancing act. So I just like to share those conversations, and I want us to get on top of it and get started. So please let me know if you have any questions, because I definitely want to have the conversation. That's the whole point about having the conversation about what's going on in Congress, what's going on with marijuana, what we should think about, what we should be concerned about. Should we be concerned about anything? Those are the things that I want you guys to ask, talk about, whatever. So let's get started. So, I'm an attorney. I'm not your attorney. So I always like to give you guys a disclaimer. This webinar is purely for educational purposes. I'm not telling y'all to buy something. I'm not telling you this. I'm not, doing anything else for you guys to do. This is just for us to talk about education. That's it. And like I said, please feel free to have a conversation, to ask me questions, whatever. So let's go. So more or less, this webinar covers a couple of topics. So the first one is the MORE bill, which we're going to talk about. That's pretty much going to be the focus of what we're chatting about today. So there is a House bill and there's a Senate companion bill, and we'll talk about what that means and why that even exists in a second. So the next question is where does the bill go from here? Where is the bill? Is it a bill? Is it a law? Where is it? And so we're talking about that. We're going to answer that question. And then also, how can you get involved in the industry? What does this really look like? So those are the conversations that we'll be having this evening. And like I said, please feel free to shoot me messages, ask some questions, just so I know, one, that you're here and you're with me. And then two, also, I don't want you guys to feel like I didn't get my questions answered, because again, we'll be having these conversations over and over and over again, but I want us to get it right. And I want it to be a good, helpful conversation. So yeah. All right. Oops. I don't know what I hit. Okay. So the question is that a lot of people end up asking me, or more so if you have not talked to me or met me before. My name is Courtney Richardson. I am the founder of the IB Investor. I have been teaching women how to invest for about 5 years directly. About 5 years. About 5 years through the blog. I've been on tour with Brown Girls Who Invest all year. Our last tour stop is in Houston on December 14th. Super excited about being on the tour, having the conversations. We sold out in Atlanta, we sold in Chicago, we sold out in my hometown of Philly stand up. We sold out in New York. So we're just going one more stop before we are done for the year. And then we rev up again for 2020. A lot of people ask where we're going in 2020. I don't know yet. I definitely know that Miami is on the list. I'm pretty sure that North Carolina, I think maybe the Charlotte area is on the list, but beyond that, not really sure. The West Coast. So Miami, the West Coast, and the Carolinas are on the list. So just know that. So I'm glad I was able to tell you about that. But some of the things that I've done in my experience, I've been in the financial services industry for over 15 years. So as long as I've been out of college, I've been in some way, shape, or form talking about money, dealing with customers and money, doing that stuff. So one of the biggest things that I've done is I took my mom from bankrupt to retired in 11 years. I worked as a 401k specialist at one of the top investment firms in the world. I managed an average portfolio of about $3 million as a high net worth advisor. I'm a former stockbroker and investment advisor, and I have been teaching how to invest in cannabis for the last 2 years. So that's a little bit about me. And so I hope you feel like, all right, I think she knows what she's talking about. So you might have seen me talking about cannabis a couple of different places. So I was talking about cannabis at the Stocks and Stilettos conference in Georgia last May. I was recently, earlier this year, I was on TV discussing how to get into cannabis business with the Philadelphia Association of Black Journalists, or PABJ. We were at the Cannabis Education Conference, and I was also like right after that, I like ran down to Dallas to have a conversation about cannabis at Total Wealth Live, which was in June. And then most recently, like last week before last, I was talking on a women in cannabis panel and talking about what it's like to be a woman in cannabis, also talking about investing and giving the history and the overview of cannabis, because I don't think we really know it as well as we think we may know it, although we feel like we've had a lot of interaction with cannabis across the board. So anyway, so let's get moving. So what's going on? So before I even get into this, let me back up for one quick second. Cannabis. So we've had a problem with cannabis well before the 1970s. I usually start the conversation in 1970 with the Controlled Substances Act, but it starts way before then. I usually give a little timeline, but I want to generally give you a timeline, just a little bit overview. So there was propaganda regarding cannabis since the turn of the century, and it was heavily racialized and stereotyped, focusing on Black and brown people. More specifically, marijuana was related to Mexicans. And if you notice some of the language and the spelling about marijuana actually has an H in it on purpose. So it was very much focused on, being divisive, being focused on propaganda, all of those things. I wanted to really share that with you. So when we talk about kind of cannabis reform, we know that kind of like where we were and kind of where we look to go or where we hope to go. So anyway, so I'm going to move a little bit forward. So where we are is that overall, there was not a federal prohibition on cannabis until about 1970 under the Controlled Substances Act. That's a big deal, especially when we're talking about what's happening now. That being said, in 1937, there was a Marijuana Tax Act. So basically, if you had marijuana on your person, you were using it for recreational purposes, or if you were using it for medicinal purposes, either as a doctor, a dentist, whatever, you had to pay a tax. You had to disclose that you had it, and you had to pay a tax. That's the first thing. Now, between 1937 and 1960, whatever, states decided that they wanted to make marijuana illegal on the state level. So now you have kind of like a broken system. You have on the state level, if you have marijuana, you're in violation of state law. But on the federal level, if you have marijuana, you have to disclose it and pay a tax on it. So now we have like this issue here that, we always talk about, I'm actually invoking my right to Fifth Amendment. I'm like, listen, I have a right to remain silent. Anything I say can be used against me. We're in the court of law. We go through that whole thing. Is that I'm gonna use my right to remain silent. I'm not going to self-incriminate myself. But that's exactly what was going on, and right before, we'll say, like from the 30s to the 60s, that's what was going on. So lo and behold, there is a law professor or some sort of person. I've read different kind of narratives about who this guy was, but either way, he was coming across the border of Mexico, and he had marijuana on him. So the custom agents were like, "Where's your marijuana tax? Your tax stamps?" And he's like, "Yo, if I tell you I have marijuana on me, I'm going to be in violation of Texas law, and I basically self-incriminated. So that's a violation of the Constitution." So they took it all the way up to Supreme Court, and it was U.S. v. Leary, and it was 1969, and the Supreme Court was like, you know what, he's right. That is violating his right against self-incrimination. So they validated the Marijuana Tax Act. That being said, that's why they had the summer of 69 and everybody was happy and whatever, because everybody was high. So, but 1970 comes along, Richard Nixon's in office, and he's like, you know what, we're going to get rid of this once and for all. They passed the Controlled Substances Act. It scheduled drugs in, it's 5 schedules. The top schedule, or the Schedule 1 and 2, were kind of like the most dangerous of the drugs. Guess what marijuana was listed under? Schedule 1. So that means that it's basically no good use for marijuana at all. Like there's no medicinal use, there's no nothing. Like it's just a bad drug, it's highly addictive, and there's no good use for it other than kind of an addiction, something to cause addiction or to give you a high or whatever the case may be. It's not a good, I don't know how to explain it, but it's not a good thing. But they actually knew that marijuana was not a Schedule 1 level drug. It wasn't. And that was well known by the Nixon administration, but it wasn't talked about until about the 1990s. So, and then at that point, Nixon's out of office. He resigned in the 70s. Like, what are you going to do about it? The war on drugs in the 1990s, when this became kind of common knowledge, not really. When it came out, I mean, what was anybody going to do about it? The war on drugs was in full swing, and everybody was getting a piece of the pie, kind of the making money off the war on drugs, making money off of mass incarceration, making money off of all of those things that had to do with, the war on drugs. So who was going to stop it because somebody lied about it being a Schedule 1? No one. So anyway, so that's kind of what I wanted to give you as the background. So kind of fast forward to now, we've been, states since about, I want to say 1996, California said they passed what's called the Compassionate Care Act. And they said, listen, if y'all want to use marijuana, if you are sick, ill, whatever, we're not going to stop you. We don't have a problem with it. So that was kind of like the beginning of kind of changing the laws about cannabis in the United States. And then in 2012, Colorado decided they wanted to legalize. Washington and a couple other states legalized marijuana. There was also medicinal marijuana that was legalized in the interim. I believe it's 33 or 34 states that have legalized so far medicinal marijuana, and only about 11 or 12 that have legalized recreational marijuana. So that's where we are. Now, as a background, the DOJ is usually the entity that would be doing the enforcement, because everybody's like, well, wait a second, isn't marijuana illegal? So how are the states supposed to be able to do anything if the federal government is supreme? What happens to the supremacy clause? People are like, what's going on? I'm lost. So the DOJ has not received money to enforce marijuana as basically in a state where it has a legal marijuana framework. And I give you quote of legal marijuana framework because, again, like I said, marijuana isn't legal federally, and there's this thing called the Constitution and the Supremacy Clause. So something's off. So I give you that kind of legal quote thing. But a lot of people have been pushing back. And I like to give you kind of like a gloss of history, is that this is kind of what happened when prohibition started to go away. States were saying, the federal government said, no alcohol is prohibited, whatever. And then they passed and they did a constitutional amendment, and then they also passed, and that was 1919. And then they passed an additional act, kind of like an enforcement act to support the Constitution. Okay, fine. And then probably like mid-20s, New York was pretty much the biggest state that was like, we're not doing this anymore. We're losing too much money in revenue from alcohol sales, and this is not working. So they just stopped. And then other states have also during the 20s stopped because they were like, yo, it's so expensive for us to go chasing them behind these bootleggers. Nobody's doing this. We got other stuff to do. And then what happened in the 20s, y'all? The Great Depression. So again, then you start seeing things change. You kind of see a change of guard because now the government's like, we need money, we need revenue. People don't have jobs. We're not getting money into our treasury like we were used to. What are we going to do? And they were like, oh, we're going. So what they did is they passed what's called the 3-2 bill, which is basically if beer or wine was under 3.2% of alcohol, then it was legal. But then right after that, then they passed, I think maybe like six to 9 months later, then they passed basically the repeal of prohibition, which was the repeal of the constitutional amendment, and basically allowed states to handle alcohol whichever way they wanted to. And I think that's a way that marijuana and cannabis is going to be going in the United States. So I give you that background to kind of get us all on the same page of where we are now. So boom, we have multiple bills floating around about marijuana, cannabis, everything. So HR 3884 is by far the most radical bill out there. And I tip my hat to the rep out of New York, Jerry, who just he's the chair of the House Judicial Committee. He was just like, listen, we gonna go, let's go. And I was like, oh, I appreciate these New Yorkers. These New Yorkers, y'all are okay with y'all Tims. So, but he basically like kicked down the door and said, we're going to get this through. We're not going to play with it. He introduced it in July. And like I said, we'll talk about what happened yesterday. All right. So yesterday, the House Judiciary Committee accepted, pretty much the Moore bill. They basically passed it. They passed it in their committee. And it gives me stress to say pass, because when we say pass, we just assume that it's a law and all those things. And that's not quite what happened. So we'll talk about kind of the process of how we got to this whole House Judiciary Committee and what needs to happen next. But I just want to talk about the bill overall. So the bill overall, just making sure anybody have any questions. Please let me know if you guys have questions. The bill is called the Moore Act of 2019. It's the Marijuana Opportunity and Expungement Act. And it's HR 3884, which was passed in the House, that is actually the House bill. Excuse me. And then you also have the Senate bill, which is 2227. That's the Senate companion bill. And this, the Moore Act passed the House Judiciary Committee yesterday. That's what happened. And the purpose of this bill is to decriminalize and deschedule cannabis to provide for the reinvestment of certain persons adversely impacted by the war on drugs, to provide for expungement of certain cannabis offenses and for other purposes. This bill is crazy. Like, I got so excited about when I read the bill. I'm trying to see, do I have it next to me? I do. Okay. So I don't know if you guys have kind of listened to me before. I'm trying to get this bill together so you can look at it. So the bill is 35 pages. Here it is. So you can see it. I gave you guys a little sample of it in the corner. And it changes a lot of the scheme of cannabis as we know it. And even so much so, it changes the name of cannabis. So cannabis, marijuana, for the most part, interchangeable in our conversation. Generally, when I talk about cannabis, I'm talking about marijuana and hemp. Hemp is already legal. Hemp was legalized in December of 2018 under the Farm Bill. That already happened. A lot of people are like, oh, President Trump did it. Not really. Let's be very honest, is that President Obama started the pilot program, which enabled it to happen. He started the pilot program under the Farm Bill 2014, and they were able to carry the pilot program into a full legalization in 2018. So please understand that President Obama started, and this is not like me like jumping on the Obama train, but President Obama started the ball rolling on this conversation. So that is what's going on with HR 3884. That's like the overview. So now we're going to get into the nitty gritty. So let's talk about our friend Jerry. Hey, Jerry. So Jerry's the head of the House Judiciary Committee. So he's all in the mix up because, he's like deep, heavy in the impeachment hearing. So they've been just really in the mix up for the last couple of months. So Jerry, he is the bill sponsor of the Moore Act of 2019. It was introduced, like I said, July 23rd, 2019, and it was passed in the House Judiciary Committee November 20th, 2019 by a vote of 24-10. Pretty good. And there's actually a Republican sponsor of the bill, which, in we're in a very partisan environment right now. And I'd like to share that with you to say, like, hey, a Republican did jump on. And one of the things is that he's from Florida, his community that he represents is heavily involved in the cannabis industry. There's a company called Trulieve, and it's a Florida company that focuses on marijuana delivery, marijuana just generally in Florida, on the medicinal side. And, and let me back up and let me time out for just a quick second. So marijuana and cannabis overall helps with so many different ailments, one of which is pain. And a lot of people, a lot of boomers have gotten in a place, and even my mom's not really interested, but I'm trying to get her there. But, in terms of pain, there's not a lot of things that you can do that aren't that aren't harsh on your system. And a lot of people are just like, I'm in pain, I just need relief, I don't care how I get it. So now that's kind of really what's starting everybody, or I should say not everybody, but more people looking at marijuana seriously, because somebody will slip them something, to say, hey, just try it. And then all of a sudden they get a lot of relief. And I've seen that even in my own experience, that, I had a family member who their hand was bothering them a lot. And then we were able to get them a patch. They used it and they were like, yo, I was able to get my first good night's sleep in a very, very long time, because the alternative of dealing with the hand was surgery. And when you start getting up in age, your 60s and 70s, like no surgery, and I should say this, generally no surgery is routine. So our no surgery is minor. So you don't want to put yourself under the knife unnecessarily. And that's what my family member felt. So now we're kind of seeing a change in an idea or a shift in how we look at marijuana, which is completely different from the turn of the century, over 100 years ago, and what they were thinking about marijuana then. So I just wanted to give you that conversation to say that in Florida, what do you have in Florida? Whole bunch of old people, and that's not a bad thing. But again, these are people that for medicinal purposes may be looking to use marijuana for those reasons, to kind of reduce their pain or whatever the other issue or ailment is. So this is our friend Jerry. Say hi to Jerry. Say bye, Jerry. So here's Kamala. So Kamala is the sponsor of the companion bill in the U.S. Senate, and like I said, it's S2227, introduced on the same day. Now, she's also on the Senate Committee on Judiciary. So I like to share that with people also. And as we know, she's also running for president. But this is the bigger thing that I like to talk about here, is that the Constitution actually requires it's a revenue section of the Constitution. Article 1, Section 7, Clause 1, bills that are actually considered that actually have a revenue provision must start in the House. That's kind of like what they call the origination clause or the revenue clause. So everything that starts in, we'll talk about what's in this bill and why this even happened in a second, but the bill actually had to originate in the House first. The Senate's going to always pass, kind of like do a companion to it, because they have to basically kind of come together between the two houses and come up with the joint bill to present to the president. But we'll talk about that in a second. But I wanted to kind of share that, a lot of people think, oh, the Senate is this, it's like, it's great. It's very high, it's very prestigious, all those things. It is, but it's just some interesting parts of our government, like the origination clause that says, no, we don't care how important y'all think the Senate is. Anything having to do with revenue generation is going to come from the House. So here we are. This is the overview of the changes. And I wanted to, I kind of gave you a big overview of the changes, because it's 35 pages of changes. So I kind of wanted to condense them to the really high level things. So we talked about the Controlled Substances Act. So the Controlled Substances Act of 1970 made cannabis a Schedule I drug. So as you can see in the listing of the Schedule I drugs, it's actually listed there, Schedule I, fine. Now, the Farm Bill amended the CSA from 1970 to remove industrial hemp, kind of changed the language to say just marijuana and not cannabis. So that was a change that happened last year. And this is actually requesting a change to completely move marijuana out and not schedule it at all. So not only, it's not even get to a point where they just move it down a couple of schedules, just completely removed off. That being said, there is a Schedule V drug that actually has cannabis in it, which is Epidiolex, which is a seizure medicine that's out of a company, GW Pharmaceuticals, which is out of Great Britain. So I like to share that with you, that there is something that's not, there's one aspect of cannabis that's not Schedule I, which is Epidiolex. Only drug that's out there out there in this manner that's actually coming directly from the plant. Now, Marinol is the synthetic version of THC, and that's been used since the 80s. And so, so I wanted to talk about this for a second because this got on my nerves. So there was a article going around about From the Hill talking about Joe Biden and how his conversation is that that marijuana was a gateway drug. It was a really bad headline because the headline was actually not factually correct. When you read the article, he says that we need to do more research, we need to have more conversations to really make sure kind of the understanding of the drug and kind of the plant, kind of like hedging it like, hey, we just need to find out more information. I'm not going to say we're going to legalize it or not. We just need to find out more information. Player, we have all the information that you actually need. The University of Mississippi has been testing, had authorization from the federal government to test marijuana for years. I want to say it's maybe back to the 1970s, but it may not be that far, but they definitely have been testing for maybe about 30 years. So we have plenty of information about marijuana and kind of the and how it interacts. So we're pretty good there. So I think we all have to get on the same page about where we are in this process. So I like to share that just as a little aside, like, hey, we know that it's not a gateway drug. We know that that's a lot of the things that have been said to us as propaganda is not true. And we have to separate what I call the real from the fake. So that's part of the conversation, reason why I like to have these conversations about cannabis. So anyway, back to Controlled Substances Act. So completely remove it from the scheduling. That's what it's going to do. And then retroactivity. So it's going to apply to any offense committed, case pending, conviction entered. Let me say that again. Shall apply to any offense committed, case pending, conviction entered. That completely changes the scope of the way things operate in the United States. A lot of times people are, and then also what I've noticed is that people will be denied federal benefits because of drug conviction. That, according to this bill, is no longer, that will be no longer, that you cannot refuse, federal government cannot refuse federal benefits because of drug conviction, or what I should say is that there's anything that has to do with like Section 8, anything like that. So I thought that was crazy. Like that really changes the contours of how we live in this world based on the way marijuana, I should say cannabis, however we want to call it, has been treated in the United States. So anyway, so we have the Opportunity Trust Fund. So they are actually, not only are they legalizing it, they are taxing it, which is appropriate, at 5%. And the money that they're receiving from this tax, 60% is going to go to the Attorney General, and 40% is going to go to the Small Business Administration. So they're, just to put in perspective, they are really dealing with crime on the Attorney General side, and they're also dealing with opportunity, which is giving funding to the Small Business Administration for grants and loans to actually put people in the game that have been excluded from the game for so long. Like I'm so excited about this bill, and we'll talk about what may happen to the bill, but by far, I think Earl Blumenthal, I think he's out of Oregon. Earl is my boy too. I mess with Earl heavy. He said this is probably the most sweeping and most comprehensive marijuana legislation that he's seen, or cannabis legislation, however we're going to call it. It's just good. And he's also establishing the Cannabis Justice Office, which is going to be funded from the Cannabis Opportunity Trust Fund. And it's a grant program, like I said, community reinvestment for those most adversely impacted by the war on drugs. And they'll be provided job training, reentry, legal aid, literacy. Just crazy. Also, you won't be able to be denied a clearance, or unless you have a safety sensitive job, that's your use of marijuana is not going to not hinder you in your federal work. Again, really dope. And then also, and I thought this was really interesting because I told you that the name or the word cannabis is heavily charged. They're changing, cannabis will replace marijuana or marijuana or marijuana, like this. I have no accent, just don't judge me. But changing marijuana marijuana, yeah. Doesn't matter where it is in legislation, everything's going to be cannabis. And I really appreciate that because it removes this racially charged word and kind of puts it away, puts it to bed. Now, I'm sure people in the street will be using it, but it really changes the contours of what we think about it and removes this racially charged word. And I like that because words matter. And the history of words and the beginnings, genesis of words in these racialized times that we live in and that we've always lived in, let's be very clear, really changes things for kind of generations to come. So let's move forward. So there's always, I tell people, always look, like if there's something that's put together a certain way, I always tell my students when I'm teaching, even teaching on the collegiate level, always look to see if there's a definition. There's a definition. So those individuals, and this is like honestly not my favorite part of the bill. I think this is a little bit more narrow than I would like it to be seen, but we'll talk about it in a second. So the individual most adversely impacted by the war on drugs is an individual who has had an income below 250% of the federal poverty line for at least 5 of the past 10 years. So they were poor, and they have been arrested for the conviction or arrested for or convicted of the sale, possession, use, manufacture, or cultivation of cannabis or controlled substance, except for a conviction involving distribution to a minor. So there's a carve out. Like if you were playing with the kids, you're not going to get this relief. And I think that's relatively fair. Or whose parent, sibling, spouse, or child has been arrested for or convicted of such offense. So basically, if you were poor and anybody in your family was adversely affected by the war on drugs, you're going to get some extra help. Now, I like this. I think it's really dope. But here's my other problem is that honestly, anybody who was even a neighbor to a person that was adversely affected by the war on drugs was adversely affected by the war on drugs. So anybody in these communities that were affected, I think I would prefer to see a community map of places that were targeted by law enforcement, and then really saying, okay, these are communities we have to reinvest, and not necessarily individuals most adversely affected. Because again, nothing's in a bubble. Nothing kind of just sits and exists by itself. It's more than that just going on. Like this family's affected, but the next door neighbor who, might have had their house shot up or whatever the case may be, or house ran into by accident, or had been a victim of civil forfeiture. That's also very crazy because you didn't have to be touching the poverty line to be a victim of civil forfeiture. And let's talk about that for a second. So civil forfeiture, and it depends on where you were in the United States. Most states have kind of basically let it go and kind of gotten rid of it. But if for example, if you were a grandma and your grandson was selling some kind of drug out of your home and they were living there, they could come and take grandma's house under civil forfeiture before all of the adjudication of the actual offense. They can take it. Like, boom. And I think that needs to be addressed. Like, I like this. I think the individuals, these people are adversely affected by the war on drugs, but everybody else was affected by the war on drugs. If you were black or brown in these areas where we're targeted, you were adversely affected. Whether you were adversely affected in your day-to-day, if you were adversely affected in the value of your property, who knows? But it's not just these people. And I want to make that very, 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 very clear, because civil forfeiture was no joke. And I've just seen like people's families torn apart and ripped apart because, of these archaic and overly invasive laws. So I'm off my soapbox. So I wanted to share that with you. And I appreciate you guys for listening to my soapbox. So anyway, so where are we with the bill? So where is HR 3884? Where is it floating around? So we know that it passed. Let me move this over for you guys. We know that it was introduced in the House of Representatives. It was given the HR designation and a number. So that's what we call it by now. And then it got referred to committee. So the House, so just as a kind of clarification point, the House refers to all committees that have jurisdiction over provisions of a bill. And that this bill is pretty far reaching. So I want to talk about, so it went to the House Judiciary Committee. It also went to Energy and Commerce. It also went to Agriculture. It went to Education and Labor. These are the committees that it went to. Ways and Means. And this is the Chief Tax Writing Committee. And like I said, there is a 5% tax included in the bill, and because of that, it's going to go to Ways and Means, and it's going to originate in the House. Let's see. Small Business Association. We talked about kind of there's some small business carve outs. There's about 40% of the Cannabis Trust Fund money will be going to the Small Business Administration for the administration of loans and grants based on like focusing on what they call in the statute as defined legitimate cannabis business. It's going to Natural Resources and Oversight. And so there's basically 8 committees that it needed to go to. Sandy made a very good point. I just want to talk about that as soon as I get back to, as soon as I go through this committee. So there's 8 committees that had it. The judiciary kind of pushed it through. They're done. So like 7 more have to go. Oh my goodness. Are we going to get this done this session? Well, we may. So Jerry, our friend Jerry, remember Jerry? Hey, Jerry. Jerry made a very valid, is right, basically trying to get the other 7 committees to kind of waive their jurisdiction. I think they're all headed by Democrats. And one of my legal eagle friends, like my legal sisters, made a comment earlier when we were talking about this and said, voting matters, and it does matter. And the reason why I shared that is because, all of these, the House committees are chaired by Democrats. So the Democrats are pretty much going to like, hey, how can we make this happen? How can we put this on board? So again, we're like, hey, Democrats. So they may actually get it pushed through, which is going to put it on the schedule to get it heard on the House floor. Now, like I said, we have all the stuff going on with the Senate. I don't expect that the companion bill is going to have such an easy go of it, if at all. I don't believe that the Senate's even going to hear the bill. So I don't think it's going to make it to the president. That's what I think is going on. So where we are in the process is that it has 7 more committees to be dealt with, whether they're actually going to do a full process on it or if they're going to waive their jurisdiction to get it pushed onto the floor. Not very clear. I think it's going to pass the House easily. The Senate may not happen. The Senate may never even hear it. So just keep that in mind. So I think I wanted to say, because everybody was just like, yeah, we're like on our way. We're going to full speed ahead. Not really sure about that. Not really sure if we're going to get exactly what we want right now. And that's not saying that it won't happen. It's not saying that at all. It's just saying that I'm not really sure. And I could be surprised too. But based on the temperature of the Senate, and Mitch in the Senate, I will not call him our friend. And Mitch in the Senate, I don't see him even kind of, because the chair has a lot of power on what they will hear and what they will entertain and what they won't. And that being said, is that I don't think he's going to entertain this at all. And it's not like he hasn't done that before. So that's kind of where we are. So we have this phenomenal, amazing bill that is kind of getting steamrolled through the House. It's probably going to be successful there. That may not have the same success in the Senate. That's where we are right now. Let's see. So like I said, I kind of already talked. Oh, shoot. I didn't realize I had a whole slide on this. Oops. So we have the House Energy, Commerce, Agriculture, Education, Ways and Means, Small Business, Natural Resources. There's actually a provision, and I wanted to talk about this. This like really frustrated the mess out of me. So a provision in the bill, there's a National Forest System Drug Control Act of 1986. So you are out here in these streets regulating drugs in the forest? For real, United States? That was what you were spending your energy on? For real? Like, some of this is like maddening. Like when you really get into it and you really get into the history, when you really get into the legislation, when you read the commentary from the floor, if you ever get a chance, if you really want to find yourself like your blood pressure up and you have to like take a drink of whiskey, read some of the commentary from the turn of the century, about kind of like drugs. If you read them, you're like, oh my gosh, like they're saying like, the black man gets cocaine and he like rapes our white women. And you're like, oh, like what's going on? So, and it's like really said on the House floor. So I want people to say like, this was real, and this propaganda, this misunderstanding was real, and it really manifested itself in documents like, the CSA, documents like the Marijuana Tax Act, the Henry Anslinger, well, whatever his last name is, and his whole like, tribe of gang of thieves and what they were doing and really pushing the agenda. So again, here we are. So the question that a lot of people ask me is like, well, how can I get started in the industry? Since marijuana is really taking off, like, where do I go? How do I start? Like, so it depends on how much money you have. If you don't have a lot of money, you can really do things kind of at home. You can invest in the stock market. You can become a thought leader. So I started learning about marijuana about 2 years ago, and I got really serious about it. And it only came from my students asking me more like, hey, Court, can you tell us more about marijuana? I'm like, I don't know, you smoke it. But beyond that, I didn't have any experience. But what I did is I just really jumped in. I did a lot of reading, a lot of research. I spent a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of resources to become up to speed on what was going on. I mean, and again, if you ever take my classes, and I focus on Canada, and not completely on Canada, but the companies that are what we would call like mainstream are Canadian, because Canada has legalized medical marijuana since 2001. And they legalized recreational marijuana last year in June to go live about last October. So October 18 it went live. But again, if you have medium to high capital, you may want to invest in a dispensary or a farm. And a hemp farm, I mean, hemp is, a lot of people don't know what they're doing with hemp. And it's not a bad thing. I mean, what happened is they really stopped growing hemp in about the 1940s. Let me clarify, they stopped growing hemp about around the time of the Marijuana Tax Act, because it made it so cost prohibitive to actually grow hemp, because it grew so freely. It was a cheap kind of cheap textile, cheap source. And once you add a tax to it, just makes it not productive enough for you to actually grow it. However, during World War II, the Navy needed rope. So they were like, hemp for victory. And so all of a sudden, everybody growing hemp again. But nobody's growing hemp really in the United States since the 1940s. So nobody has any idea what they're doing. So they're also growing hemp for CBD, they're growing hemp for fiber, and they're growing hemp for seed. So those all have different methods. Like, for example, you don't want your buds to be, your flowers to be pollinated if you're looking to get CBD. So what happens when you're farming for CBD, you have to go through and kind of cut down all of the males and get them out, because you don't want them to pollinate. So again, there's like always something different going on with how to do these things. And nobody, like I said, nobody really knows. So just everybody's kind of like going by the seat of their pants. And there's kind of some best practices, because again, Kentucky actually has the best soil for hemp. And so when they started the pilot program, Kentucky had the most acreage allotted for hemp farming. But guess who number 2 was? Pennsylvania. Very proud of my state. But my state also has very good temperature to grow hemp. But that being said, there's not a lot of information. Everybody's just kind of figuring out as they go. But if you have medium high capital, you can kind of take, and when I said medium high capital, like money, you have money, you can kind of make those decisions. You can make those risky investments. Be a little bit more open and exploratory. Now, if you have a lot of money, you can run a dispensary, a farming operation, or a grower processor. And I kind of I put the farming operation down because the farming operation is the grower processor, and they're very expensive licenses to get, especially in Pennsylvania. I don't really know the other state rules and regulations, but it's just super expensive to get them. So, but that's the way that you can get in, but and started in the industry. So, does anybody have any questions for me at all? So, I wanted before I want to ask and answer any questions because I feel like I've gone through a lot and I don't want to miss anything. I probably have missed stuff, so there's that too. But the big question that everybody asks, like, how do we invest in marijuana? So I would like to kind of just briefly chat about that. Um, and before I even do that, like, so Sandy made a very valid point where she was saying that, entire neighborhoods are devalued because of the war on drugs. And I just want to, and so basically our wealth, a lot of African Americans have a lot of wealth in real estate, and the main driver of their wealth was devalued by a government initiative. I just think that's crazy, and it's unfortunate. So, Sandy shared that one of her students is doing a hemp business to do a farm product to hemp business. Like, hemp is a really dope and very versatile fiber. I really am a hemp fan. So let me just do this and pull this up. So there's basically 5 ways to invest in marijuana. There's actually a little bit more. We kind of talk about them. I talk about them a lot. But we'll talk about it a little bit more. So you have picks and shovels, which is basically, if anybody's ever heard of the gold rush, the gold rush is that people who were making money were not necessarily mining for gold, but they were giving people the picks and shovels so they could mine for gold. So they didn't really matter if you were successful in your gold mining, but you were getting the tools. Like Levi Strauss, which actually went public in 2019. They started as a canvas company, and they ended up using the canvas to make jeans. And they were like, hey, these things are like chafing. They're great, but they're chafing. Can you help us? And then they ended up getting a fabric from France to make these jeans. And that's how their company was born. Just as a background on Levi Strauss, they were public up until I believe the 1980s. And then they were purchased by a private company. So they were taken private, but they went public recently. So I just want to share that with you just as a little aside. So also, let's see, we have growers, growers, producers, that's going to be what we call your seed to sale companies. Seed to sale, that's pretty much like your big companies. We're on Canopy, Kronos. These are not me telling you to buy anything. These are just some of the companies in there. Tilray, Village Farms. I feel like Hexo, there's a couple, and they're actually been having some difficulties. Part of it is sourcing. Some of it is some of the hype. The hype has deflated, kind of like a deflated balloon, which is a good thing because I think it's now kind of becoming a little bit more realistic about their valuations, about their multiples between their earnings and their actual market value. So I think that's a good thing. You also have pharmaceutical companies. It's kind of like if we can't beat them, we join them. So a lot of pharma companies have a lot of money. A lot of cannabis companies don't have so much money. So they're able to join forces like Voltron and like get it together. Also, like I said, you have hemp CBD. There's a lot of different hemp opportunities that are starting to pop up. And then also, like I said, competition, I would think more like alcohol companies, tobacco companies, any company that kind of you would see them as a natural competitor to marijuana or cannabis or weed or however you want to call it. But now all of a sudden they have a lot of money because they've been in the game for a little bit. So they're able to partner, provide the money they need. And then they're also able to get a stake in kind of like the next wave, because it's not a function of if marijuana or cannabis is going to be legalized. It's a question of when, how, and what, and who's going to be the major players. Those are the questions that we're asking moving forward. So what to avoid when we're looking at investing in cannabis? Avoid penny stocks. I do not care if your cousin made $1,000 in one day on a penny stocks. I don't care. I don't like them, especially in these volatile industries. It's kind of like volatility squared. Like you have a volatile industry like marijuana, you have penny stocks, which are a whole mess, and then you put them together and then poof, there goes your money. Also getting involved when you're looking at opportunities to invest with actual businesses that you can go and touch and see and whatever, not necessarily trade it on the stock market. Don't get involved with people that don't get involved with business with people you don't know, like people on like the internet. And not saying that you can't, it's just you have to really vet them. Like everybody's like, oh, we're making a lot of money. Let me see your receipts. I need to know a lot more. I need to see your operation. Like you really, like I tell people when you're looking to invest in a business, you have to treat like your cousin. So if your cousin's like, hey, Courtney, I have, this marijuana business. I want you to invest. I'm like, okay, well, how long you been doing marijuana? What do you do? How do you do it? What's your profit? Have you been making money? If you have been losing money, how much? What's your, average customer? And I have a whole bunch of conversations and a whole bunch of questions with them, because I'm going to listen, I need a lot more money. I'm going to lot more information. I'm going to give you my money. And then also, I don't mess with anybody who gives me a guarantee. Yeah, you're going to get, 15% back in 6 months. No, I'm not. Probably not. What happens if I don't? So any guarantees, that's usually a red flag in the investment world. I mean, we hope that we'll be able to, garner XYZ return, but that return isn't guaranteed. So again, I like to share with people like penny stocks, getting involved with people you don't know that kind of like give you like a lot of smoke, and then guarantees, all bad. So just leave them alone. It's kind of like rolling dice. So there's ways to invest in legal cannabis. I talk about, my class covers like what is cannabis. This is kind of like a general overview, laws surrounding cannabis. We talked about a big one, but there's a lot of other laws that are kind of going on, especially the tax laws, which I haven't even gotten a chance to talk about because they just start to get crazy. 5 ways to invest in cannabis stocks, all the different ways to invest in cannabis, best places to buy cannabis companies, and how to manage the risk of investing in cannabis. Like I said, really crazy environment. Really hard to deal with as you're starting to get up to speed, because there's so many moving parts. Every time you turn around, something's going on with cannabis. So the value is $277. But what I'm doing today is that I'm basically giving you guys what people will invest like today. You'll get what is cannabis, law surrounding, 5 ways to invest, best places to buy, how to manage the risk. Also, you get it's like an hour and a half. It's actually a little bit longer of replays, but it's split into modules for easy review. So you're like, oh, I want more information. I need to hear that again. You can always do that. And then lifetime access to the class. So today, total value about $326. The price is normally $147, but for today and for the next day and a half, which is tomorrow at 11:59 Eastern Standard, you can grab the class for $97 using the code NOTATEST. And the reason being is that it's about time that we're going to have to get into this industry, and we're going to really have to make a difference, and we have to understand it. Don't invest in anything you don't understand. I tell people that all the time, but there's no excuse for us not to understand cannabis, especially because we've been on the short end of the whole cannabis thing for over 100 years. So any questions, please let me know. I'm looking in my comments. I don't see any. But let's see. I don't see any questions at all. But let me just double check. So if you guys have any questions, let me know, because I want to answer them as much as I can, because I feel like there's a lot that I covered this evening. Oh, we were going for a while. There's a lot that I covered, and you definitely have the replay. It's going to be on my website. I probably will stick it on YouTube also, just for people to get a little bit more information about what's going on with the MORE Act of 2019. I hope everybody was able to get some value. And all right, so I think that's it. If you need to contact me, you can catch me on Instagram, you can catch me on Twitter, you can catch me on Facebook, all the Ivy Investor. So it was great talking to you all. I hope you guys, like I said, got some major value, and you guys have a great night.